I think the committee is mostly getting this right. But if you're a BYU fan, you have a legitimate gripe.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, right here as a part of the number one sports podcast network. Thank you all so much for making that possible. Games to watch this weekend that will impact the playoff. That's just a reality of life. And Sam Leavitt could leave Arizona State and set off a wild snowball of quarterback departures in the portal. Let's start with the playoff rankings, though. As I said, the committee, I think, gets this right most of the time. I have been more pro-committee than most over the years, because I think they've gotten it right when it has come down to the final rankings determining who gets in and who gets out. It doesn't mean that they're always perfect. And right now, I think they have a couple of blind spots, and one of them is BYU. If the season ended today, part of this is indeed the structure they're working within, because the ACC and the Group of Five are automatically getting teams into the playoff. If the season ended today, with these rankings, before the penultimate week of the regular season, BYU would not be in the playoff because they came in at number 11 in this week's rankings, up a spot from last week, as a matter of fact. But here's something that keeps standing out the more that I look at it. BYU is one spot ahead of Utah. One spot. They have a better record than Utah. They're 9-1, and Utah is 8-2. I don't have a problem with Utah being that high. I think Utah is a really good team. Utah beat them, and their 11th are the Cougars, the Utes, sitting there at 12. Notre Dame lost to Miami, and Notre Dame comes in at 9th, and Miami comes in at 13th. So if you beat a team in one of the games of the year of the Big 12, you will be rewarded less than Notre Dame, who lost to Miami. Does that make any sense to anybody out there? If you want to have the Alabama debate, and by the way, if the playoff was selected based on the current rankings, as I talked about earlier this week on the show, BYU has or last weekend, I guess it was, BYU's got an Alabama problem that they're right there. BYU's one spot behind Bama. If Bama goes 10-2, do you think BYU's going to jump them at 11-1? BYU might have to win the Big 12 championship to get an automatic berth to the college football playoff. At 10-2, they didn't get in last year with a road win over a playoff team in SMU, and it is setting up once again. Here's the crazy thing, though. Going back to the Utah point, BYU plays Cincinnati this week, who's a good team. Not a great team, but a good team. The Bearcats just lost at home to Arizona last week. They might be a little ticked off. Their conference title and playoff hopes were dashed. They controlled their own fate to get there wildly enough until they lost last week. If they play spoiler and beat BYU, committee, are you telling us that a 9-2 BYU would be ranked behind a 9-2 Utah, who BYU beat? Is that what you're saying? Because I can even understand, not fully agree, but understand the gap between Notre Dame and Miami, even though the Hurricanes have the head-to-head. When it comes to playoff selection, I will not be able to get behind that. But if you're telling me that BYU is one spot better when their record is one game better, are you saying that if BYU loses this week, you'll just keep them there at number 11? If you do that, okay, that's fine. I'm good with that, committee. Do any of us think that that's going to happen? Because the Notre Dame Miami gap and the BYU Utah gap just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, Miami took a couple of losses to teams that are currently unranked. They're not horrible teams. They're not as bad as, Florida State, who beat Alabama, but Bama's got a bunch of wins to back up their ranking right now. So I understand that. And in my own top 25 this week, which you can see if you're watching on YouTube here, I've got Alabama at number 10, BYU at number 9. 11, 12, and 13 are basically interchangeable, USC, Notre Dame, and Miami. Notre Dame's got the head-to-head. I'll get to that as the season goes on. I will value head-to-head when my final rankings come out. But Alabama, their loss to Florida State is just being forgiven because they have a bunch of great wins. But then on the other side, Notre Dame has one good win, and it is a good win over USC. That's a top 15 victory, and I agree. That's counteracting their 2 losses because they're quote-unquote good losses. That does not compute. And there could be, as I'll talk about later on the show, a complete and total logjam of 10-2 squads. But the inconsistency there is what I don't care for at this point in time. These things have had a tendency to work themselves out over the years. We've been in a very similar position each of the last couple of years, really last year going into the 12-team playoff, and there were all the 9-3 SEC debates, and I think it's very clear a 9-3 team from any conference is not getting in, which I'm actually happy about. I really am, because what do I want most of all? For the regular season to maintain its intensity and its urgency so that it continues to be the best regular season product in the world. It's been diluted by the 12-team playoff, but it has not been eliminated. It hasn't been knocked off that top rung. It's just not quite what it used to be. Alabama would have been eliminated from the playoff altogether by losing to Oklahoma over the weekend. There is still plenty of impact from that game. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I want to draw this contrast with the committee's own rankings is they see the world the way I do now with regards to the group of 5. They had South Florida ranked in the top 25 last week, and now it's Tulane. Tulane controls their own destiny to make the college football playoff. I am fully and wholeheartedly supportive and on the side of the committee in this matter. I have had Tulane as the highest ranked group of 5 team for the last several weeks because they have more Power 4 wins than anyone else. I think North Texas should be in that conversation. I guess James Madison should be in there, but I'm not as big of a fan because their schedule is not strong in any way, shape, or form. I think you can kind of put Navy in there. You can kind of put San Diego State in there. But the second tiebreaker, besides head-to-head, to make the American Championship game is the highest ranked team in the committee's rankings. Well, no one's going to surpass Tulane. So if they went out, Tulane will make their way into the American Championship game, and maybe they'll square off with North Texas. I think that would be great. I think those 2 teams playing in the American Championship game would be a play-in game for the playoff. Do I think that the G5 should automatically get a berth into the playoff as opposed to just having access? That's a different conversation. We're not going to go down that particular avenue. But those are my 3 biggest takeaways. That the BYU situation, if they were to lose Cincinnati, could be really bad, and I think the Cougars would basically be done unless they found a way into the Big 12 championship game and got the automatic bid. I think Notre Dame is being overvalued based on eye test and not as much on resume, which is what my rankings are about. And I think the committee sees the world the way I do with regards to Tulane, because the Green Wave have got the best group of 5 resume right now after South Florida lost last week. I thought that anyway. I thought South Florida was second, but now the Green Wave are right there. We'll see if they can back it up. We've got 2 weeks and a lot of stuff's going to get sorted out, and there is going to be some chaos that can ensue. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And if you want to spice up college football, which is already the greatest sport on planet Earth, you want to make it even better, FanDuel gives you the ability to do just that. Every single game, all odds that I talk about here on the show are provided by our friends at FanDuel. And every game you want to bet on for college football, FanDuel has you covered. Point spreads, money line, totals, prop bets, futures, it's all over there at FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's a pretty great deal. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Can I interest you in 3 games that could just disrupt things in the playoff picture? Good, because that's what you're about to hear. Let me start with Kentucky going to Vanderbilt. There might not be a more dramatic change in my own playoff rankings, top 25 rankings, that will occur if Vanderbilt wins their next 2 games. Because for those watching on YouTube, as you can see, I have Vanderbilt behind Texas. That could change after this week. It might sit in my head a little bit longer, but they lost to Texas. Vanderbilt's only got 2 losses. Texas has 3, one of which is to a bad Florida team. So there's that side of it to consider. But Vanderbilt is sitting there at 18. But Vanderbilt is a 2-loss team. They're 8-2. They go to Tennessee next week at Neyland Stadium. So Vanderbilt has to avoid the classic, the dreaded, the horrible, awful, no good, very bad, the look-ahead spot. Did you know that Kentucky's fighting to be a bowl team? Did you know they're 5-5? You probably didn't, because the last time you saw anything about Kentucky football that you cared about, I don't know when exactly that would have been. But they did beat Florida earlier this year, and Florida was competitive with Georgia, who we know is really good. So Kentucky's got a transitive close game with Georgia. Does that count for something? Realistically, the last time you probably thought about Kentucky football in a major way was when they almost beat Georgia. What was it, last year, the year before? They had them on the ropes, on the road. Georgia was on the road, that is. And Kentucky found a way, as you might expect, to not win the football game. Well, here they go against Vanderbilt this week. And Vanderbilt at 10-2, I don't know how you would leave them out of the college football playoff, because what 10-2 SEC teams going, can you imagine the outrage? And frankly, I don't know that it's a guarantee. I've said for a while that Vanderbilt at 10-2, and this is the sort of mess, the train wreck pile up, car wreck pile up, however you want to phrase it, that could transpire, if certain things happen. What if USC goes to Oregon and wins this week, and then Oregon beats Washington? Oregon's resume has been discussed a lot. At 10-2, are you leaving a Big Ten team out of the college football playoff at 10-2? If Vanderbilt wins their next 2 games, are you leaving them out of the college football playoff at 10-2? You couldn't put them in over Alabama. Would you put them in over Oregon if it comes to that? I think the committee is sitting there hoping that scenarios like these don't happen. You know what would simplify things for the committee is if Kentucky went to Vanderbilt and won this game. So if Vanderbilt avoids the look-ahead spot, I do think they will win, because they are a good football team that has been bested by 2 teams that don't always play the best brand of football but have more talent on their rosters than Vanderbilt. You can't say that about Kentucky. Vanderbilt, I think, is as talented, probably more talented. They just play a better, more cohesive brand of football, and we all know what Diego Pavia is about. So that game could be a play-in opportunity for Vanderbilt next week when they go to Knoxville, but first they have to avoid the classic look-ahead spot against Kentucky. So that's an interesting one. Speaking of potential 10-win teams, what about Georgia Tech? Our friends at FanDuel have them favored by a meager 2.5 points this week against Pitt. Do you remember what Pat Narduzzi said last week going into the Notre Dame game before his team was soundly beaten at home with College Game Day in town for the first time in I don't even know how long? Do you remember what he said? I'm paraphrasing here. Doesn't matter if we win this game. Doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Gave his team a built-in excuse. What do you know? They trailed early, often, and all day. So Pitt now goes on the road to Georgia Tech, still in control of its own fate to make the ACC championship game, because there's that cluster of teams. SMU is in this camp. Duke is no longer in this camp, but Virginia is in this camp. Georgia Tech and Pitt, they've got 1 ACC loss. Well, that's going to change for one of these teams this week. But let me throw this scenario at you. Just going to put it out there. What if Georgia Tech loses at home this week to Pitt, who would then re-enter the top 25? But then Georgia Tech finds a way to beat Georgia. What do you do with that Georgia Tech resume? Losses to Pitt at home and NC State, who's scrapping to be a bowl team in the ACC, which is 4th out of 4 in the Power 4 conferences. But they've got to win at Georgia. What if that happens? Do you want to be the committee and decide that? Do you want to decide between Notre Dame, who you know is playing much better football than Miami at 10-2, or Miami, who won the head-to-head? I can tell you right now, that's another change I'm going to have to make in my rankings, because I can't, in good conscience, if Miami and Notre Dame, who plays mostly ACC teams, not exclusively, by the way, if Miami goes 10-2 and won the head-to-head, yeah, Miami has to get in over Notre Dame as an at-large. And Miami's not making the ACC championship game. That will not transpire, because teams with one loss in conference play are going to the title game. So if Georgia Tech wins this week, then they have a play-in game, win or lose the ACC title game next week when they go play Georgia. So that game has a lot riding on. And when it's just 2.5, you may have seen Pitt last week. They gave up over 175 on the ground to Notre Dame. And I felt like there was a lack of maximizing the full potential on the ground against that Pitt defense. What does Georgia Tech love to do? They love running the football. If you haven't watched Buster Faulkner, who could be a head coach at some point, if you haven't watched Buster Faulkner's offense with Haynes King at the helm, do yourself a favor and make sure you check out at least some of this game. It's really fun. It's just a fun offense. The way that they use fly sweeps and counter actions and quarterback runs and toss options, it's unlike any other offense in the country, because there are very few quarterbacks, if any, that are built like Haynes King. Riley Leonard at Notre Dame last year, there's a lot of similarities between those two offenses, but Notre Dame's a little more downhill running with their backs. Georgia Tech features the quarterback run as well and as creatively as anybody. So if Pitt is able to take that away, Mason Heinschel looking for a bounce back after last week's performance against Notre Dame. Georgia Tech's defense is nowhere near as good as Notre Dame's. You can score points on them, even though you're playing this game on the road. Fascinated to see. I do not have a pick yet on that game. I got to stash that one. That's a crockpot game. That's a crockpot game. This one isn't. Michigan, again, a potential 10-win team that could just throw a wrinkle into everything. They go to Maryland this week, who's been playing some really poor football. I put them in my best bets last week. They couldn't come through against Illinois, despite getting 2 touchdowns and half a point, because Illinois is not terrible. I knew Illinois would win the game, but I thought Maryland might be able to score some points. Nope. So Maryland this week, if you can't score in Illinois, even though you're at home, I don't know how you're scoring a lot of points on the Michigan defense. I'm interested to see how they try, but remember the look-ahead factor I discussed with Kentucky and Vanderbilt, which is very real, hence why I brought it up. Michigan has the same thing, because who's looming next week? Good old Ohio State. And that could be one of the best rivalry games in recent memory. At least it could have as much buildup as any matchup that we have seen amongst any rivalry in college football, not just that one, in the last several years. Because if Michigan can avoid the look-ahead spot, win at Maryland, suddenly they're playing next week to be 10-2, despite their schedule not being particularly strong. Their resume isn't incredible. They lost to Oklahoma. They lost to USC. Neither one of those teams are bad. They're both in playoff contention as well. But Michigan's best win is probably Nebraska, which is a decent win, but it's nothing special. But what if you take that resume and put Ohio State on it? And you've got to win over the Buckeyes, who have been number one since the first week of college football came and went. What happens then? There is a world where Georgia Tech with a win over Georgia, Michigan with a win over Ohio State, Vanderbilt with a win over Tennessee next week, USC with a win over Oregon, and if Oregon were to then follow it up and beat Washington on the road, all those teams could be sitting there at 10-2. If Alabama can then go on the road, beat Auburn, guess what? They'd be 10-2. What do you do with that many teams? Because you've got 5 bids that are locked in. Miami could be 10-2. BYU better not finish at 10-2, because I don't think they're going to get in they're not going to get in over all of these teams. So they have these sorts of scenarios pop up, and they can be looked at every single year. They have a tendency to work themselves out. Every single one of these hypothetical 10-2s that I'm laying out to you right now, they're not all going to materialize. My question is how many do? Because some of them will, and there will be a debate. And we might see a 10-2 Big Ten or SEC team get left out of the playoff. It happened to the Big 12 last year. It happened to the ACC last year. Could very well take place once again. But the 10-2 conundrum for the committee it looks like it's right around the corner. Gosh, it's going to be a great weekend. There might not appear to be as many big games as there have been in the past because it's SEC Cupcake weekend. But you know what? This is the last year we have to endure it. So at least there's that once the league goes to 9 conference games. So let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments below or hit me up on Twitter at @LockedOn_CFB. Drama brewing in Tempe. Yikes. First, this episode brought to you by Game Time. College football, it's the greatest sport on earth. If you want to go to the games in person, there are not as many chances left as we'd probably like. The season has flown by, and guess what? You can still go with Game Time. You don't want to deal with endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That is why you want to use Game Time. Those reasons, not there on Game Time. The app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees, which might be my favorite part. I'm not even kidding. What you see is what you pay. I've used Game Time to go to a sporting event. I've used it to go to a comedy show, and the process was great. I saved money because I compared to other sites. The process got the ticket right onto my phone. Had no issue getting into the event. Game Time is what you want. And you can see the view from your seat. You know what the price is going to be up front. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. So if you're not aware of what happened the other day, depending on when you're listening to or watching this show, Sam Leavitt could leave Arizona State. He's injured, out for the year. The Sun Devils have a remote, not zero, but pretty slim chance to make the Big 12 championship game and return to the college football playoff. So Sam Leavitt, according to a report over at On3, was, as they put it, being shopped around by his camp to other schools. Then there was a screenshot of a text message that was leaked out from Sam Leavitt's brother saying, "This is ridiculous. Sam hasn't decided what he's going to do." Now, there are a couple of different things to note here. First of all, my initial reaction to this was I find it really hard to fault fans who, when asked about the current state of college athletics, some of these folks are in the older crowd, say, man, it's become too much. It's gotten to be over the top. There's too much money. There's no loyalty and all that sort of stuff. Stories like these make it hard for me to push back on those folks. I encourage them to focus on the positive in college sports and what NIL and the portal have brought to the college athletics landscape. But when you get sucked in on the negatives or you harp on it too much, it's really hard for me to turn around and go, yeah, you're not justified in feeling that way. Nah, you kind of are. So that was the first thing. Second thing is if you read the text message exchange that Sam Leavitt's brother apparently had with Pete Nakos of On3, and I believe the authenticity of those messages have been verified. I have not done so myself, but if that's the case, that it is a legitimate message from his brother, and I think it is, then he's just not happy with how the story's being framed. He wasn't actually pushing back on the idea that Sam Leavitt could go elsewhere at some point in time. He said Sam hasn't decided what he wants to do just yet and was really upset with how, it was framed, and maybe it was over the top from On3. I don't know. I'm just reacting to this. I don't have any boots on the ground reporting to give you here on the show. But what I think is fascinating is the idea that Sam Leavitt could not return to Arizona State. What? Whoa. Hey, that'd be one of the biggest names to enter the transfer portal in the last several years. How many times has a playoff starting quarterback from the last 2 seasons, and we won't know for this year, of course, because we don't know who's getting in or who's going to enter the portal come January. How many times do those guys wind up playing for other teams? Last time it happened was Nico leaving Tennessee. And for my everydayers out there, you may remember, I led with that on my show for 9 consecutive days because it was such an unbelievably shocking story to have come about in that portal cycle. And so If Sam Leavitt were to leave Arizona State, which, again, does not by any stretch of the imagination appear to be a surefire ordeal, but also seems to be incredibly possible. If he were to leave Arizona State, a couple of takeaways there. Number one, Arizona State's NIL situation is not as strong as Kenny Dillingham would like it to be. He messages a lot. Had a quote at a press conference the other day about getting more money infused into his program because he's very aware of what it takes. You don't have to like it. Businesses, fans, donors, you don't have to like. That's the way it is. It is a very black and white situation in many instances. If you want to compete at the highest level, you have to be funded to compete at the highest level. If you're okay just being a good program that has some fun moments and splashes, then that's totally fine, but don't expect to go out and win a national championship if you can't compete with other schools financially. Can guardrails come in place from, the NCAA, I guess? Sure, it could make it better. It wouldn't change the fact that the amount of money capable of being raised from school to school varies, and that's dependent upon what you're able to get from the community there. Secondly, when Arizona State made the playoff, it was incredible. It was improbable. They were picked to finish last in the Big 12. If they're losing the guy that has brought their quarterback or brought their team back to relevance at quarterback, boy, that feels like a tough blow. Not just in the financial sense, but in the player personnel acquisition and retention world. If you can't keep that guy around, boy, that could spell some really bad future outcomes in the roster building world for Arizona State. It doesn't have to. And again, none of this is assured to even happen. But another thing that I thought about, and I was discussing this with somebody the other day, I think that this year's transfer portal quarterback market is going to be as wild as we have ever seen, whether Sam Leavitt is in there or not. I think the number of guys that are going to enter the portal that wind up being Power 4 impact starters will be as great as we have seen before. Now, there have been some big-time portal moves over the years. If you think back to, say, the 2023 Pac-12, look at how many transfers you had in that conference that didn't just succeed in that league, but also went on to be great in the NFL. Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Cam Ward, to name a few. They also had DJ Uiagalelei, which, think whatever you like of him, had Oregon State with their best season in a very long time. All of those portal quarterbacks, that was just in that conference. This past cycle was not nearly as strong. There was not the depth of quality quarterbacks that there have been in cycles past. This year, I very much get the sense that there will be. I think it will be a stronger quarterback portal market. If Sam Leavitt is able to go, he would demand top dollar, I think, from a lot of bigger programs. Think Big Ten or SEC. And certainly Mendoza going this past cycle, yeah, that's about as high impact a move as you can get as well. But I think there are going to be more Darian Mensah types who is flying under the radar a bit, not for me, at Duke, because it hasn't been the season that Duke was hoping for. Their defense isn't that good. Mensah's been kind of boom or bust. They're like Texas A&M light, but very, very light with regards to their offense. They create explosive plays. They also turn the ball over and can be incredibly streaky there. But a name to keep an eye on to see if he goes in the portal is Jaron Kiave-Sangopolotele at Cal. I know that once he started popping with the Bears earlier this season, there were a lot of folks behind the scenes in Berkeley that started getting things in motion to make sure that he stays because they know how good he is and how much he would command. That doesn't mean teams are going to stop trying to ask. That's a name. I'd look at the guy at North Texas, Drew Mestamaker. If Eric Morris stays or goes, other schools are going to be able to offer more for a guy that's in the American, has North Texas on the brink of playoff contention. I'll talk about the G5 playoff games or playoff implicated games tomorrow on the show. I think that's a name to watch, and we don't know who the mystery names are. No one thought after the season Tennessee had a year ago at this time that Nico would wind up in the portal. Imagine telling that to somebody. So who's the big name going to be? And those are just a handful of guys. I'd like to see if someone could pull Malik Washington away from Maryland. Talented guy who I don't think is in a very good situation because Maryland is trying but just not succeeding to be a good, successful college football program. If Mendoza goes to the NFL, where's Indiana looking at quarterback next? This quarterback cycle could be absolutely wild. And Sam Leavitt, make no mistake about it, would be one of the biggest names. And I will throw this one at you to wrap today's show. Can Baylor, regardless of what happens with Dave Aranda, can they keep Sawyer Robertson there? Because if Sawyer Robertson, who I believe would be able to get another year of eligibility, that is one of the best pure passers, I think, in all of college football. And he's just being stashed away at Baylor. That feels like a Miami move. That feels so Miami to me. Just throwing it out there. So if Levitt goes in, he'd be one of the biggest names. That's an if. We'll see how the situation evolves. The quarterback cycle is going to be wild, and we don't know who the surprises are yet. I'm almost excited for the offseason. Operative word being almost. Games are always better. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.